Hello and welcome to our fifth video of our little series. Today we're going to be looking at the engine of our M151A1. And be prepared for a few surprises. But before we start, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram and Facebook for regular updates from the Allied Museum. And if you are tired and bored of looking at your screen, we invite you to explore the analog world by visiting the Allied Museum. The entrance is free of charge. In the last episode, I gave you an update on our trouble with the rear differential as well as on restoring the front axle and front suspension. But now back to the power pack of our M151A1. The standard engine of the whole of the M151 range is a 72 horsepower, 2.2 to 2.3 liter, 4-cylinder petrol motor, as the Americans would say. So don't be fooled by anyone who tells you there was also a diesel version. I'm not sure if some special versions like the fast attack vehicle had a diesel engine, or if armed forces of other countries that also operated M151s switched to diesel. But the standard US Army versions all had petrol engines. As you've seen in episode 2, the engine is part of the power pack, which also includes the transmission, the clutch, and the radiator, plus all the other units such as the water pump or the alternator. The whole power pack can be removed as one in order to enable the troops in the field to quickly replace the faulty power unit with a new one. The priority on the battlefield is not to find the exact fault, but to get the equipment back into the fight as quickly as possible. So first, the different parts of the power pack had to be disconnected from each other. We then had a separate transmission, which looks quite all right from the outside, a radiator on which we had already discovered some odd bruises and damages, and the engine itself, which in the next step was stripped from components like the water pump or distributor cap in order to be disassembled completely. The first discovery we made was hiding in the clutch. The flywheel seemed to be in a good shape, but what really surprised us was the clutch disc itself. The mechanics at the maintenance division of the US Army Berlin Brigade actually installed a disc made of sintered metal. Those clutch disc types are typically used in sports cars or in off-roaders. Of course, our M151A1 has four-wheel drive, so it is an off-roader. But as a parade vehicle, it was nearly exclusively used on roads and only at very slow speeds. So parades aren't exactly quarter-mile drag races. With a racing clutch disc like this one, however, you are supposed to spend as little time as possible with your foot on the clutch pedal and not gradually slide off while you put your other foot on the gas pedal, like you would perhaps do in a busy inner city traffic. So not ideal for a parade during which you are driving at walking pace past your commanding officers saluting them. But anyway, since we do not plan to use our parade vehicle off-road, more like in the urban traffic jungle of Berlin, we will replace the old racing disc with a more suitable regular disc, which means also replacing the flywheel and the pressure plate. Tags and inscriptions all over different parts of the power pack indicate that the US Army Berlin Brigade last inspected the engine components of this Ford Mutt in the second half of the 1980s. Here you can see the exact date written on the lid of the oil filter casing. It could be that this car remained in storage after 1986 or 1987. So if you can help us shedding light on the car or on the fate of our car between 86, 87 and the handover to the Allied Museum in 94, we'd like to hear from you. But back to the project at hand. The radiator was emptied. The remaining cooling was captured in a bucket. And after separating it from the engine block, we found some more dents in the radiator. It became more and more evident that this radiator has seen far more than just the roads of Berlin. At some point, I suspect it must have done a sightseeing tour through the undergrowth of the Grunewald forest, because there are so many damages that we've decided to replace it with a new one. I mean, sure, it could still be good for another couple of 100 miles or so, but the risk of losing coolant and hence causing the engine to overheat and destroy it is just too high. But let's turn to the heart, the engine. A first glance under the valve bonnet did look promising. Everything looked pristine and ready to run. The engine was also relieved of the rest of the coolant, and the thermostat may look a bit unsavory, but is still usable. The water pump, however, will be replaced just to be on the safe side. The engine has now been disassembled completely. All the components were checked, and unfortunately, there were some more unpleasant surprises. As you can see, the exhaust manifold shows clear signs of unusual high heat exposure. To be more precise, the white color indicates that the engine must have become so hot at some point that the manifold actually did start to glow. Otherwise, you would not get this color pattern, especially the white color. It is possible that this is also the reason why the carburetor was not attached when the car was handed over to the Allied Museum. We suspect that someone did try to find the reason for the overheating problem and suspected a problem with the carburetor. We did seem to have found the source of the problem eventually. The ignition timing was all over the place. The ignition timing is set for 6 degrees in front of the top dead center. That means that the ignition spark should be triggered at the point when each piston is still compressing and is 6 degrees in front of the dead center, where each piston is being moved back down again by the ignition of the air and petrol mix inside. Or in simpler terms, the green line should have actually been where the red line is now. So someone confused the markings during the last setup for or inspection of the engine. So in this setup, the ignition is firing far too early. In hindsight now, it's actually quite a miracle that the engine did not overheat during our trial run, if you also consider the damage on the radiator. You can also see traces of the overheating on the outlet or exhaust valves. All of them show the typically white color indicating of having to deal with way too hot exhaust fumes in the past. And cylinder number 4 even showed as if oil had been sucked into the cylinder. This can mean that some of the gaskets are perhaps not sealing properly. Part by part, the engine was disassembled. All parts were set aside for further inspection, cleaning, repairs, or replacement. The surprise came when we looked closely at the engine block. Once the pistons were removed, we discovered some unusual grooves inside the cylinders. We are working together with 2 very experienced mechanics on this build, and neither of them had ever seen this pattern before. It looks as though the engine had already experienced a complete overhaul. We presume that during the overhaul, the cylinders were drilled and honed by using a wrong setup, so that the process left these grooves in the cylinder. These grooves are problematic because they make the cylinder untight. The grooves allow oil to enter the cylinders by bypassing the gaskets around the pistons that are supposed to prevent exactly that. The only solution to get rid of these grooves is to re-drill and hone the cylinders. This means that we also have to replace the pistons, as the current ones will not fit anymore. They will become too small in their diameter once the cylinders are made wider. This is something we cannot do by ourselves. So we brought the engine block to a specialist who will do the drilling and honing for us. The other astonishing thing about the engine block was the date. As you might remember, our M151A1 was delivered to the US Army in April 1969. However, the casting number on the engine block states 1973, and the serial number has a patent number imprint from 1971. So the numbers simply just don't add up. For us, the provisional conclusion, and provisional since we can only speculate and we might never find out for real, is that during its service with the US Army, this vehicle had its engine, or at least its engine block, replaced by a spare. Another possibility, and I think the one most likely, is that the original engine of our 1969 car was needed as a replacement in a, shall we say, regular service vehicle. So perhaps the guys at maintenance at the time took the engine out of the parade vehicle, a car that was only needed for a couple of occasions a year anyway. It looks like they turned our M151A1 into a little Frankenstein, putting an engine back together with old, used and botched up spares they had lying around. It could also be that towards the end of the US presence in Berlin, the maintenance knew that this car was to go to the museum and not to be used anymore. It was only supposed to look like a complete vehicle. Well, whatever the reason was for cannibalizing this car, we have the problem now, but we're going to fix it. But to finish on some good news, we're going to have a quick look at the transmission. According to the plaque attached to the casing, this one was last inspected in 1987. But unlike the engine, the inside of the transmission seems to be in a very good state. Except for replacing the seals and sleeves, everything is in order. Everything is within the so-called wear limits. So a big relief, especially after the drama around the engine. We also did some minor repairs on the starter motor. But for now, this concludes the overhaul of the engine, because we have to wait now for the new, larger pistons and for the engine block to return from drilling. So that's it for now. And again, do not forget to like, comment and subscribe. And see you next time.